Filth that is imperceptible, running water over it once suffices. Right? So let's give a practical example. One of the children has an accident on the bathroom floor. So now you have urine on a hard surface. Right? It's a puddle of urine. So if dad comes along and takes a rag, or say takes paper towels and dries it up, right? So then the spot where it was will still have an odor, right? And that has to be removed. So then, then he takes a moist rag with soap and wipes over that, so that now all there is a spot on the floor where there was urine, and now you can't smell the remnants of it, and there's no color there. So now that spot is still affected by filth, and it's najasa hukmiya, it's imperceptible filth. So basically there's a ruling in the sacred law of impurity there, however there's nothing that we perceive. So according to the Shaffi school, that's still not pure. With some of the imams, perhaps the Hanafis, at that point it may have been pure, but in the Shaffi school, no. Okay, it still has to be washed by water running over it. So then he takes, his istinja bucket or whatever, and he knows some fiqh, so he just pours water so that there's a puddle the same size as the initial puddle and slightly larger, so he's gone over the edges. And then at that point, he's washed it, and then he can just dry that up, and it's pure. Right? So basically, what has he done? He removed the qualities, and then he just had imperceptible filth, and then he washed it, and once it's been washed once, it's pure. It would be sunnah to do so thrice, though not obligatory.
Would thrice be pouring water over it, wiping it up, pouring water over it?
Yeah. Unless it was running off and down a drain, thrice would entail, and Allah knows best, probably drying it would be better, and Allah knows best. Wringing is actually sunnah with garments as well. Yeah.
But if it was running water, just the fact that we let the running water over it.
If it was running off and down a drain, yeah. Okay, so that's washing, basically. Another example, the baby a child has an accident in their clothes. So now we have clothing that's affected by urine, right? Or let's say they're leaking and they sit in their parents' lap. So then their parents, that clothing cannot be prayed in because now it's impure, it's been affected by urine. So similarly, typically you're not going to wash something until it dries. If it dries and you could not detect any odor or color, then it's just simply a little bit of water needs to run over it or run through it in the case of a garment, and then it's pure. So say they put it in a washing machine or they put it in a face bowl and just filled it with water at that point, then it's pure. Now, if it was, soaked, like in the case that it was in child's clothes, in fact, that were soaked and they had a pronounced odor of urine, then it would have to be washed, and washed enough that the odor was removed. Okay, so now, in our two examples, the first example we had urine on the floor, and then we poured a puddle of water over, and there's a puddle of water sitting there now. And then the second example, let's say that we washed it in a face bowl or a bucket, or a washing machine for that matter, and we put clothing that had been soiled with urine in there. So now what do we say about the water that's left over? Right? It's used, and this goes back to a discussion that we had in the very beginning of this course. And that was water that is pure and unpurifying. Right? So we said that was either used water that was used for removing ritual purity, or used for purifying something that was physically impure. So now that water is pure and unpurifying with conditions. So write the conditions for wash water just write the conditions for the purity of wash water. And by wash water here, we mean in this context, water that's been used to wash filth, to remove filth. So with these conditions, that water is pure, though used so it's unpurifying. And if these conditions are not fulfilled, it's impure. So then you got to deal with that, because if you get it on yourself or your clothes or wherever you throw it, that thing is impure. Right? So the conditions for the purity of wash water. The first condition is that the water be added to the thing being washed. That's kind of an awkward translation. Let's say that the water come to the thing that's being washed. And I'll give an example by the opposite so you understand what we mean. But first let's write the conditions. The second condition is that the water not change. The third condition is that it not increase in mass due to filth, or from filth. That it not increase in mass from filth. And the last condition is that the spot, or that the object is purified. And we'll go through each of these using the two examples we had. Right? So, the first condition, that the water come to the thing being washed and not the reverse. What does that mean? That means that, for instance, in our example of a garment that was soiled with urine, that if you were to fill up a bucket of water and throw it in there, the garment, then it would make the water impure. However, if you took an empty bucket and stuck the garment in there and poured the water over it, then it wouldn't. And that's a condition with the Shafi'is that they argue about within their school. And basically they're saying that when you're pouring water onto something, it has a strength, a purifying strength that it wouldn't if you're just throwing filth into the thing. And some other schools will differ, but that's the Shafi'i position. And it's a little bit tough, but it's pretty easy to work around. Yeah.
In that regard, so that means that the water, the pure water that we're pouring onto the najasa in the bucket, the remaining water will be pure, or are you saying the water that we're actually pouring on there will be pure?
The water that we've poured on there will be pure with these conditions.
With those conditions?
Yeah, but if we fill the bucket and then threw the filth in it, it would be impure. Relied upon the position with the Shafi'is. There's a difference of opinion in their school, and like the Maliki school would be okay still, as long as the water wasn't changed.
So it's pure and it's not purifying, so it can't be used to purify another garment, or it just can't be used for wudu and ghusl?
That goes back to the conditions of used water. Technically, it can't be used for any other purifying purpose. However, if you put a bunch of stuff in the same bucket and pour water over it, it's treated like one thing. Yeah. So basically, once it's separated from one, now it's used. But before it's separated from one, and when you have a whole bunch of objects in one bucket, it's treated like one object. The whole system is treated like one object. Yeah. So,
but like, what about like when you do dishes?
Dishes.
A lot of times you'll wash dishes. You'll wash a group of dishes, and then there'll be more dishes like on the stove, like the pots.
Right.
And then you'll bring them over.
I would just rinse. If they're impure, just rinse them individually.
Oh, but then they wouldn't be impure unless it was touched by something.
Yeah.
Just regularly wash them.
Yeah. Like if you're washing blood off them or something, but if you're not, then yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's easier with dishes just to rinse off the najasa, because once you get like a bucket of soapy water that's najas, it's difficult to deal with at that point. Okay, so the first condition is the water come, not the other, right? So basically when you're purifying filth, don't fill it up and then throw it in. In a washing machine, it doesn't really matter because there's 2 more cycles behind it. So it's not really an issue. The second condition that it not change. So let's say our example of the urine on the floor or a garment soaked with urine. Say Dad just dried it up and there's still a pronounced odor, and then he poured the water on. If there was a pronounced enough odor and little enough water, that then the water took on the odor of the urine, then that would break the conditions in the water, and everything is now impure. Similarly, and this is more likely, if you have something really dirty in a machine or a bucket, and then you pour water in, that first time an odor might remain and change the water. So at that point, everything's impure. The third condition is that it not increase in mass. That sounds really kind of unusual and theoretical. And actually, they give even more. They say, after we consider the amount of mass of water absorbed by the thing and the amount of pure dirt that came out, did we say that there was an increase of mass from filth or not? Typically, if you dry it out, don't worry about it. That's not going to happen. But when it is an issue is, say we had a puddle of urine, like we said, one of the kids has an accident. So that's like, 100 milliliters. 100 milliliters of urine, right, in a puddle. So then you pour half a liter of water to wash it. So now you have 600 milliliters. 100 of urine and 500 of water. So you have just water plus urine, basically. That breaks the conditions. So you have to dry it off. Or if it's a garment that's wet, you want to dry it out or wring it out or whatever. So there's not a noticeable increase in mass. It's just filth, basically. You have water plus filth instead of just water. So you can't add to the mass of the water from just filth, basically. And then the last condition is that the spot be pure. So let's say in our example of a garment that was affected and had a pronounced odor of urine. And then you washed that, just rinsed it without a whole lot of effort, and then the water is poured away, or the garment is removed from the water and wrung out, and the garment still has an odor of filth, then the garment and the water are still impure, because it basically was touching an impure object, and it didn't just come onto it and wash it away and take away the ruling of impurity. So with those four conditions, and if the four conditions are fulfilled, the water is pure and unpurifying. If one of the conditions is broken, the water is impure. So let's say with our example of